You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Walker Mail, at Doug Branson LOH, and what used to be a co-host, kind of an OG, like a secondary OG, but he is back, and he can only be here for 2 seconds because he's a very busy man right after the month of March.
Big time in us now that he goes to New Orleans. He covers the Final Four. Suddenly he's a big timer now.
He is fat off of beignets and gumbo. It is Nata Edwards from the Ion podcast, Ion College Basketball podcast. Nata, how are you doing, man?
Man, look, my body still doesn't feel right. So I am still jet lagged. I am still overloaded from beignets. I am looking for water and vegetables, two things I did not find in New Orleans. So outside of that, I'm feeling good. My kidneys might shut down in the middle of this, but I will be fine.
Well, we'll get you out of here in 2 seconds. We don't want to deal with that anyway, right? You got something else to deal with.
Renal failure on a podcast is a horrible way to go. You like
on your own time.
Yeah.
On your own time, Nata. You can do that on your podcast. You don't come into our podcast and do that, but it feels like you are kind of going to cause some damage with your takes on this podcast based off of what we heard you talk about before we started recording. And it's not like this is a secret. If you follow Nata at Nata the Scribe for any length of time throughout his hosting days here, throughout just you knowing Nata via Twitter, he is one to take the flamethrower and set it to his timeline. And he is here to do that about the Charlotte Hornets and even James Borrego, specifically with people wanting him gone pretty immediately. Like, let's just dive into the flames here because
let's do it.
You've put out a new rule and you've actually been a little more critical of James Borrego this year than in years past. But you have put out a new rule that if you're going to come to me with James Borrego needing to be fire takes, then you're going to have to replace him. You got to come up with a name. So let's just get your overall thoughts on what people have thought about JB, Hornets fans specifically, and what do you think about JB, the success or lack thereof that the Hornets have experienced this season?
If you are going to solely blame James Borrego for what's gone on this year, you are intellectually lazy, or you're doing it for clicks. One of those two things. It can't be anything other than that. Has James Borrego not been good this year? To his normal standard, I will go that far with you. I can go that far with you. But I need people to stop being so friggin' lazy. Because quite honestly, if we're going to have all this smoke for James Borrego, I need people to have the same smoke for Mitch Kupchak and not giving them a real center or giving them any real veterans at this point. James Borrego has had a down year, and you know what? Cool. We can admit that. But at the same time, I need people to come up with realistic solutions. Fire JB. Okay, replace him with who? We're going to replace him with Kenny Atkinson, who's probably not leaving Golden State for whatever job for this job, because the lead assistant for the Golden State Warriors is going to take a job that's not ready to win a title. Okay, sure. You're going to bring Darvin Ham in here? Same problem. Lead assistant for a title team. He's not taking this job either, guys. At some point, we have to deal with the reality that, JB might be the best we have for right now until this team becomes a title-ready roster. The only way, and I stress this, the only way that you ever think about bringing in a new coach is if LaMelo's done with him. That's the only way. Full stop. LaMelo's got to be the one to say, I want that guy out. Because outside of that, there's no point in getting rid of him just yet. Give him, and mind you, I will throw this caveat out there for this. If you want him gone, or let's say next year, they come out, they're underwhelming before the All-Star break, they're in the same spot where they are, where they're middling, same issues with a better roster, then cool, fire him. But for right now, I need people to stop being so friggin' lazy.
What do you think, Doug? What do you think? We don't need to run that through the hot machine, do we?
No, it's pretty hot. I mean, I'm sure the YouTube commenters will have plenty of suggestions as to who they would like to see replace James Borrego. I said winning record or bust at the end of at the beginning of this season, and I don't think that's yet out of reach. They would at this point, they would have to win 2 out of the last 3 of these games, which is probably what they're
going to be favored to do, right? I mean, they're going to be favored against Orlando, and they're going to be favored against Washington.
So it's not unrealistic. At the same time, I think, some of the messaging that we've heard from James Borrego, the 4 pillars, sense of urgency, a lot of these buzzwords and cliches, they simply haven't been reflected in the play. Like, I mean, to allow 2 teams right as you're getting ready to go into this play-in scenario, to allow 2 teams, 2 very good teams, but to allow them 144 points, each, I think there, and you've got after the game, Miles Bridges saying there's no, we don't have a sense of urgency, this late in the season. I just think this might be a similar scenario to what we saw with Steve Clifford, which is the message seems to be wearing thin or being lost. And I don't know if it's necessarily a reflection on JB's coaching ability or just the length of time that these players have had with JB and not had the playoff success. Whatever it is, it might be time for a new message. And I think I don't think people are being lazy. They're just saying, hey, the clock is ticking on LaMelo Ball in Charlotte. Let's make sure that we're taking the most advantage we can of that time.
Yeah, here's my take on this. Like with the LaMelo Ball stuff, you're right, Nata. If LaMelo is done with the coach and that even trickles down to some other players, then fine. You got to go find somebody else, and I understand that. But there are some pretty wild conspiracy theories out there in comments, in Twitterverse, that, hey, this didn't happen. I saw a comment the other day, and I forget who. They're all running together, where it was like, Montrezl Harrell probably got mad at James Borrego for playing Gordon Hayward when he returned, and James Borrego punished him, and that's why Montrezl didn't play. That's not by itself, right? There are so many different things out there that run rampant. And with James Borrego, I actually don't subscribe to the theory that you have to come with somebody better. I would argue nobody had James Borrego's name in mind when Steve Clifford was replaced. Like, this stuff happens all the time. Like, you can find some coaches on the staff somewhere. The Hornets, they interviewed everybody. They interviewed Jay Larranaga. They interviewed Ime Udoka. They interviewed James Borrego, and Borrego eventually got the job. So I do think a good coach or a average coach, whatever level of coach, can come from anywhere. That's why I don't necessarily subscribe to the theory that you need a name. I don't think Borrego needs to be fired this season. I think the thing that would change that is if they had an embarrassing showing in the play-in tournament, and that would be the second one in a row. That's tough to come back from, no doubt about it. But if they don't, then I kind of agree with you, Nata, where he coaches next year. Now is like no excuses land whatsoever. And if he underperforms before All-Star break, then might be time to go.
Walker, you're saying essentially that this play-in, that James Borrego could be coaching for his future here.
Well, we've talked about this. If they lose by 25 points, goodness gracious, it's the second year in a row with a high-stakes game where you are denied playoff opportunities because you get beat and drilled by 25. Like, Nata, is that fair?
Here's my question to everybody, and I understand this, but to you guys, is there a roster that you're saying, okay, they're worse than us and they have a better record? Like, that's where I'm looking at this. Like, macro. You have to look at this at the macro. Like, I understand what you're saying about if they get drilled by Atlanta or if they get drilled by Cleveland. Yo, cool. I can understand him being on the hot seat. I can even understand making some changes in the staff. And I'm looking at Jay Triano and a couple of the other assistants first. I think JB is back no matter what, but I also understand how this just changes the amount of changes they make to the coaching staff and the roster.
Yeah, that's
Look,
fine.
You can always point to roster, issues. You could have pointed to that with Steve Clifford. I mean, there were opportunities for that organization and Rich Cho to give Steve Clifford the players that, would have made Steve and drafted better. And, there are all these situations, but ultimately this is a results-based industry. And if they finish 10th place in the East and get bounced from the first play-in game, I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah, and largely not. I agree, like with a lot of what you're saying, because Mitch shouldn't be skating for this season.
Not at all.
Here's what I will say: I don't think Mitch cares, based off comments that he's made, Mitch Kupchak is not necessarily interested in going all out to win this year. And that includes spending what he viewed more money on a center, whether it be a Rashawn Holmes at the time, whether it be trading somebody he didn't want to for Miles Turner. Mitch wasn't about to do it. And Mitch is okay with sacrificing wins for the now to not do anything, quote unquote, stupid for the future. Now, you could argue the Gordon Hayward contract, the Terry Rozier contract. Hey, that's where your ideas kind of conflict a little bit. Why are you paying those guys so much money? But I do think that Mitch even said in those comments, we got a little ahead of ourselves this year. We gave ourselves the playoff mandate. Probably shouldn't have said that. The players shouldn't have said that. And that's where he is.
Got a little froggy.
A little froggy. Players got a little froggy, as Mitch Kupchak might say. Can you stick around one more segment?
Take that and then I'll let you deal with the fire.
All right.
I want to talk about Gordon. I want to get your thoughts on Gordon.
All right. BetOnline.net. It's your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championship. It's on right now. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports scores. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. More Nata, hot fire coming up next. Locked On Hornets podcast.
This is Locked On Hornets.
We need Mitch Kupchak to throw a party like Sam Presti. Can he party like Presti and Russell Westbrook?
Yeah, but who's you going to get to perform? Because remember, they got Nas.
They did get Nas. Man, who is Mitch Kupchak getting to that party to perform? Can we get Nelly?
No.
Master
P.
Yeah,
I hate you right now.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
All right, Nata, we'll get to Gordon Hayward and some other players in just a moment, but I was talking about Mitch Kupchak, what his philosophy was heading into this season. I know you wanted to respond to it.
Here's the thing. Do you know who said this roster was not good enough, Walker? We said this back in the summer.
We did say this roster. I was pounded for having my problems with what they did in the free agency. You know, the Terry Rozier contract extension was the one that a lot of people hated, but also with Kelly Oubre specifically, man, those chickens are coming home to roost in the second half, big time. With watching Malik Monk do his thing for the Lakers, I understand we don't want to have that conversation about whether he would have done that here with the Charlotte Hornets.
Okay, you can get out of here.
Look, okay, it's just like if Malik is doing that, there was no winning that argument then because he's literally having a great season. It's like, well, I wasn't going to do that here with the Hornets. Well, it's because Borrego wouldn't let him. Like, that's my problem with Borrego, right? I got a couple different problems with that's Malik Monk would get pulled to the bench after missing his first shot. Kelly Oubre is allowed to shoot 40 times anyway. But yeah, I've had my problems with what Mitch Kupchak did this offseason, what James Borrego did this offseason. All that to say, I don't think either of them should be fired based off what their experience is to this point in their Hornets tenure.
No, I don't think they should be fired. I just want people to step back and take a look at the macro. And that's the big thing that I just want everybody to understand. This team made a significant jump to get to 40 plus wins this year. And I know people won't see it that way, but also at the same time, the conference made a significant jump. Think about it like this. The team that's in the Eastern Conference, we have an Eastern Conference Finals team from last year that is in the play-in right now. That's how good the Eastern Conference has gotten overnight. I think a normal year, we're talking about this team being probably where Toronto is. Unfortunately, it wasn't a normal year. This was a much more competitive year than I think anyone seemed to understand that it was. I get why people are upset. I get why people are frustrated. I just don't think that you should take your feelings out on this team per se, because I think there's a lot more growth that happened this year. And as I've said on this podcast for many an episode, so have you, Walker, growth is not necessarily linear. And I understand people want to look at the results, but I think the results show a lot more growth than there is the negativity around it right now.
Gordon Hayward, what do you think? Should he start? Should he come off the bench? It looks, he was a late scratch in that last game.
I don't think they need him. I think they have got.
That's bold.
I honestly don't think. I think trying to fit him in right now, coming back as late as he did, I don't think they need him. I think they've gone past the need. Like, he's become training wheels. After a while, you needed him to learn everything and everything else like that. It's time to move that guy, and it's time to move him for a big.
Well,
and
that's going to be, but Nata, you have to admit that's going to be difficult, right? I mean, he's got the injury tag on him, and it didn't get any better this season. It's a huge contract. I mean, I think as much as people don't want to hear this, I mean, I think the Hornets are unless something crazy happens, I think the Hornets are stuck with Gordon Hayward, and I think you got to find a way to get him back into the rotation and figure something out for next season.
Well, every contract is tradable. It just depends on how much of a hit you're willing to take, and that's the question, right? Because you can trade Gordon Hayward if you want to. He still has enough talent. Like, that's the problem, right? Like, we don't necessarily think Gordon is this awful player. It's just that the dude can't stay healthy. And now it has become a glaring problem, even more so because now you have 2 years in a row where this guy is going to be on the bench to end the season. It is extremely troublesome to have him play on Saturday, have 2 days rest, Sunday, Monday, and then be a late scratch on Tuesday against Miami. You need this if you're going to.
Well, you know what the real problem is? You know what the real problem is that Bridges has gotten very comfortable playing the three. Yep. And you've got a decision to make in terms of resign. He's got a decision to make. You've got a decision to make, whether you want this to be the future. And Miles is exploding right now offensively, and he is very comfortable playing alongside PJ at the three.
Well, let's get you out of here on this. Like, I saw you tweet this, and I kind of agree, I did think there was a large portion where they needed Gordon Hayward in the half-court set. They needed him last year. But when they had that 5-game winning streak starting with New Orleans, it started to play a lot better. I don't think it's the lack of or absence. I don't think Gordon had any impact on this Philly loss or this Miami loss. I'm with you. And I think Miles and his ascent to what he's done has allowed them to kind of go away from a Gordon Hayward. And I think you're right. Like, training wheels is honestly a really great example.
Like, at this point, I know that people think that they can't trade Gordon Hayward. Russell Westbrook has been traded twice on that bad contract.
I'm not saying it. No, I don't think it can't be traded. I'm just saying it would be very difficult. And as Walker said, you would have to take a hit.
So is 50 cent on the dollar worth it? Is 50 is that where you're drawing the line? Is that the over-under?
I think I want to see what happens in terms of the picks they get. Does New Orleans make the playoffs? Because if New Orleans makes the playoffs, you're talking about 2 first-rounders this year, and you're talking about packaging a Gordon Hayward with that. That might be able to get you 50 to 60, maybe even 75 cents on the dollar. And then you're talking about not taking as bad of a hit. I want to see what a Gordon Hayward trade looks like. I think they will have the assets to do that.
Nata, we got to get you out of here, but just rapid fire. Anything else you want to get off your chest before you leave? Just boom, boom, boom. What do you got?
Just shout it.
Just shout it.
You know
right
what? I've done enough. Again,
Food
I'm
takes,
usually nuanced.
Player
I'm
takes.
tired.
Jalen McDaniels. Anything on Jalen? Anything on
10-day Jalen
PJ?
is back, by the way. 10-day Jalen is back.
Not this last game, Nata. This last game
Jalen
is good.
Look, this is the thing. I don't think this team was very talented. I think, like, Walker, we've had this conversation. Like, I've had this conversation with all of y'all. I don't think this team was that talented. I just don't, like, my only problem was when it looked like they were not going to make the play-in, that's when I was like, okay, let's entertain firing JB. Now that they've done that, I don't think that they, like, I'm kind of okay with where they are.
But you forget that we were in that land not too long ago. We were in, oh God, we might not make the play-in tournament land not too long ago.
And again, that's when I was okay with firing him. But that was the only point where I was like, okay, if Washington finds a way to get back into 10, cool. Yeah, we got to go. But in terms of all of this right now, like, I just, change for change's sake never works. It's one of those things that ends up hurting teams, and you end up looking like the Knicks.
All right, go back to the college ranks, you amateur, quote unquote. We're done. Nata the Scribe. Follow him on Twitter. Great follow. Charlotte Hornets follow. Got the content going out there constantly. Go check out also the Ion College Basketball Podcast, part of CBS. Nata, you're the man. Appreciate you hopping on.
Love y'all, dudes, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Love Nata too. Miss him. I'm glad he came on with us today. All right, let's talk more about Gordon Hayward, that situation, but not before we provide a message from Camp Lejeune for listeners who served in or worked for the United States Marine Corps or have family or friends you might have. I wanted to notify you of an available resource from 1953 to 1987. Personnel assigned to Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune were potentially exposed to contaminated drinking water. The Marine Corps has since partnered with health agencies to conduct scientific studies to assess impact from these potential exposures, and they are working to keep those Marines, their families, and civilian employees informed with updates and resources available to them. If you or someone you know if you or someone you know may have been at Camp Lejeune during those years, please consider registering with the Camp Lejeune Historic Drinking Water Notification Database. You can learn more and register at www.marines.mil/CL-water. That's www.marines.mil/CL-water. Let's react to Nata's comments on the next segment coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
This is Locked On Hornets.
To start this off, we all know about LeBron and how he built a school and it got a lot of fanfare. By the time 2019 closes, Bismack Biyombo is planning to have 6 schools.
Take that, LeBron.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
What'd you think, Doug? Good to have the whole squad back together. We were only missing David Walker, and then it would have been a full house for the Locked On Hornets podcast. And I think we're going to be talking with him tomorrow, right? Should be good. Have you talked to him?
I think so.
Okay, sounds good. Either way, what do you think about? Let's continue the Gordon Hayward conversation just to try to figure out how you can trade him. What are the most likely scenarios? How much would it help this team? How much would it hurt them? What areas would they be missing? We know what areas they'd be gaining. They'd get a healthy body. So just your overall thoughts on trading Gordon, what you would do it for, the value in return that you'd be willing to take.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look back in the past when they've had these large contracts that they've had to get off their books. And I mean, typically this is like a rebuilding situation where you've got some bad money and you're going to take some bad money back. And you might even have to give up some kind of assets to get that off of your books. And I just don't think that. I mean, again, there might be some golden scenario out there. You just never know. Other players with big contracts get disgruntled, and then a change of scenery makes sense for both teams. But the big hitch in that is that I think any team that's going to want to deal with the Hornets is going to recognize that Gordon Hayward is not a surefire bet to play, 60, 70 games in a season. And so that's going to be difficult to get any true value back. So, that's why I say, I mean, I really think that they're stuck to a certain degree and they've got to cross their fingers, hope that he's healthy next season and find a way to make it all work. It's going to be, there's no doubt it's going to be difficult. But that's the puzzle that they've created for themselves.
Here's what's tough is you go back to this season when we were looking at in-season trades before the deadline, and we were discussing the importance of Gordon Hayward, and it was real tough to make that call because it would have been nice to get off of $30 million a year. But we also know Gordon meant a lot to this team, and they started to kind of figure it out without him. The only trade that I saw in any kind of proposed mock for Gordon Hayward to be sent out that I was with, that I would have pulled the trigger on, it was for Miles Turner. Now, Miles Turner is the guy that also has
the most sense. Yeah.
Well, but that was even before both of them had their injury problems this year. So Miles.
Well, I mean, you would be trading you would essentially be trading, two players that both have risk involved. So that makes the most sense and is, how much. Now that they've gotten Sabonis out of there, though, it makes a little bit more sense for Indiana to hold on to Miles Turner unless that relationship has soured such that it doesn't make sense for them to stay married anymore.
Well, look, Miles Turner just can't be out of the trade conversation because I think there was a report also at some point in the past month that Indiana feels like they could get a first-round pick for him, some kind of lottery protected thing. Go. And,
that's the punishment. That's the punishment for trading Gordon Hayward is you're probably going to end up having to give up some kind of future asset.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it seemed like Indiana wanted Gordon Hayward included in any trade with Miles. Like we knew that was a possibility. We also know pretty well that Gordon wanted to go back home to Indiana, but the Pacers just weren't going to offer him as much money. Charlotte offers him more money, and he decides, you know what, I'll just take the dough and I'll come down and play for Charlotte. So it would be something that Gordon wanted. Certainly Indiana might want to bring back the Brownsburg native home to play some round ball. Like that would make some sense. I think ultimately your best bet is to find a veteran team underperforming at the All-Star break at the trade deadline that is desperate for some kind of bigger name. And that happens. And I think that's where Charlotte could really pounce and get a decent trade. Is it a Philly, right? Is it a Brooklyn or
I don't know,
Lakers, right? Like and Lakers, I don't even know what they would have that I desperately want,
Malik
like I'd do it straight up. But if you're just talking about, one of those desperate teams, I think that's one of the things that you got to be.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I hope that this doesn't turn into a Kemba Walker with the New York Knicks situation where, you just send or a very something that's very familiar to Hornets fans, a Nick Batum in Charlotte situation where you send a veteran player who's making way too much money, who is not going to be part of your future. You send that player into exile, essentially. That would be very unfortunate and feel like a giant step back for a franchise that I think all fans listening to this podcast really want this. It's time to take steps forward. That's what I'm saying. Like if you can make this thing with Gordon Hayward work at all, it would be fantastic because then you would continue to be moving forward and not have to take a step back and continue. I mean, it just feels like this organization going back to the Cho era, now into the Mitch Kupchak era, is constantly having to rewind, make up for bad decisions, and it just sets your franchise back so significantly when you have to do that, when you have to turn a Miles Plumlee into a Dwight Howard into a Bismack Biyombo situation. Like I just really hope that doesn't occur. And I really hope that they can finish the season out strong, win a play-in game, and just as an organization be a little bit more confident about what they have. It's always easy to think about what you could get, but I would rather be much more confident in what they have going into next season than trying to figure out what they could possibly get.
Well, and if we're going to tie this back before we end today to James Borrego and Mitch Kupchak, one of the problems was heading into the season, we were discussing how do you manage Gordon Hayward's minutes so this type of thing doesn't happen. And then you get to a large portion of the year, Gordon's leading the damn team in minutes. Like he's played more than anybody. They did not undergo that load management for Gordon. And now he hadn't played except for one game sparingly against Philly, and it was too much for him.
There was this big incongruency, right? That the team seemed like there was a mandate to win. There wasn't necessarily a mandate to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. That was not an expectation, but it was to win. Like you've got veterans, you've got, LaMelo Ball in year 2, you got a confident leader on the ball. So now it's time to win. The problem was they had this giant hole in their roster that is going to prevent them. It prevented them from winning regular season games, but it was certainly going to prevent them from postseason success. And we'll see that, I think, exposed in a play-in game for sure. The fact that they still really don't have a solid, NBA level big rotation. Despite Mason Plumlee's best efforts to change hands on free throws, it's just not there, especially defensively for this team. It's difficult. I think the James Borrego conversation for me comes down to two questions that I don't know that you and I can answer. It's really going to happen, within the organization. And question number one is, what is James Borrego's relationship with LaMelo Ball? Is it good? Does it have a future? Can it flower? Can it continue to grow?
Or is it fine? And is that good enough?
Yeah. And then number two would be, does the organization feel confident that James Borrego could lead them into playoff success? Not player development success, not regular season success, not a winning record in the regular season. Do they feel like this coach is somebody that can take them into the playoffs and win a playoffs series?
If
they don't, then I think it's time to move on.
It's the Brett Brown, Tom Thibodeau answer or Tibbs conundrum, right? These guys can get you started.
Sure.
Brett Brown will come in and tank for you. And are you comfortable with them winning a playoff series? And you're like, Brett Brown's a little bit different to me. I think you got the raw end of the deal in some cases. At the same time, it's that kind of ideology. Is James Borrego a startup? Is he here for the long haul? And if he's not here for the long haul, then did you already just use Borrego and then now you're done with it?
Well, yeah, and the third question would be, is the message wearing thin in the locker room? Not just with LaMelo Ball, but the entire roster. Is the message, the four pillars, everything that he's coming into every day after day, is it falling on deaf ears? Because it doesn't matter how good of a coach, how skilled you think that coach is in game, player development, if message is not hitting in the locker room, then it's time to move on. Especially if that coach doesn't have the actual on paper success, to back him up.
And I have things keep coming up in my head though. Like I imagine if Mitch Kupchak doesn't get Borrego a center this offseason, then he'll want to go on his own. We've heard him say it a million times, right? And
he seemed, that's what I'm saying. Like he doesn't seem like thrilled with the current state of affairs. There was an interesting comment. And again, I'm trying to read tea leaves, read between lines,
Do you
and
need
figure
the
this stuff out.
sound?
So it's a little bit, it's not really even speculation.
Just play it so we're safe. Just play it so
all
we're safe.
All right, fine. Hold on.
We got to be safe.
Get it.
You brought the hot take.
I don't want to speculate.
Okay. So there was a comment after the Heat loss, and Borrego said something to the effect of, they have a starting unit and they have a bench unit.
I heard that too. I was like, hi, this only Borrego, man. Like, yeah, we trapped him. We call it a trap. It's like we call it a pick and roll. We call it shooting the basketball.
I get it.
Yeah,
I call that a trap.
They have a bench unit. They have a starting unit. They're the first seed. It's like just facts. It is your birthday.
But it's facts. And so there was a lot of criticism on the YouTube comments for the lineup that went out at the beginning of the fourth quarter. And I criticized the players that were in the beginning of that fourth quarter for their play. Isaiah Thomas, I think you could have some issue with putting him there in the fourth quarter, but I think, Kelly Oubre has to play better. Mason Plumlee, Freudian slip there. Mason Plumlee made some mistakes. So I critique the players, but the thing is, as you're getting ready for the play-in, you have to be able to play your bench at the beginning of the fourth quarter. That's a common NBA rotation. You play, to that point, your starters had big minutes. He had played Bridges, and he had played Rozier, and he had played Ball significant minutes heading into that fourth quarter. You want to be able to depend on your bench to either, hold a deficit or try to chip into that deficit and then come in strong in the last 7 or 8 minutes with your starting unit to finish the job. And I think what Borrego is saying there is like, Miami has a bench rotation that is good. And now it's up to you to decide. I'll leave it to the listener to decide if the subtext there was that Charlotte does not have that bench rotation.
They've got an important game. Everyone's important down the stretch. They've got one tonight at home against the Orlando Magic. Their next game is against Chicago. Then they will finish up at home, I believe, in Spectrum Center against the Washington Wizards.
I'm just going to say it right now. The Hornets do not get any credit for playing good. They should play good defense, but you're not going to get any credit from me for playing good defense versus the Orlando Magic or the Washington Wizards. Now, if they do it against Chicago, even though Chicago's slipping, even though Lonzo Ball, unfortunately, we're not going to get Ball v. Ball because Lonzo is out for the rest of the year. But if they play good defense against Chicago, I'll give them a little bit of credit, but they get zero credit. They got to this is a take care of business game, bottom line.
Yeah, Big Dub hat only comes out for Chicago, not Orlando, not Washington.
And you better win big. The only way the Big Dub hat's coming out for Chicago is if they win big.
Does that
I don't want 2-point win against Chicago, not coming out. 4-point win, not coming out.
Well, hold on. Does that mean the only time we'll see it is if they win a play-in game? Like, could we have seen the last of the Big Dub hat? We didn't even get to say goodbye. That kind of sucks. I'm sad now. That sucked. That's how we'll end today on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Live in the present. Just appreciate things when they're here. I just hope you don't see the big L come out. Again,
I don't want to see that. That thing was hideous. That thing is shameful, and I don't want you to have to wear that again. All right. Thanks for making Locked On Hornets your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA, Locked On Experts, covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your pods. Thanks to Nata for hopping on with us. And thanks to you, as always, for listening to us wherever you get your podcast. That includes YouTube. Have a great rest of your day. Hopefully, we'll have a fun Friday tomorrow with you and David Walker.